There's someone you can't stand. You know exactly who just came to mind. The person whose voice irritates you before they even finish a sentence. The one whose habits seem specifically designed to get under your skin. Maybe it's their arrogance or their neediness or their dishonesty or their weakness. Whatever it is, you feel it in your body when you're around them. Your jaw tightens, your patience evaporates, and you become a version of yourself you don't particularly like. You've probably assumed this reaction is their fault. They're genuinely terrible, and you're simply perceiving reality correctly while others remain blind. But what if that certainty is a defense mechanism? What if the intensity of your reaction is a message, not about them, but about something in yourself you've been refusing to see? Jung discovered something that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The traits that trigger us most intensely in others are almost always traits we've disowned in ourselves. He called this mechanism projection. The psyche takes qualities it can't accept internally and experiences them as external threats. That coworker whose arrogance infuriates you is carrying a confidence you were shamed out of expressing. That friend whose selfishness disgusts you is exercising a self-interest you've been taught to suppress. The family member whose neediness exhausts you mirrors a vulnerability you've learned to hide so thoroughly you've forgotten it exists. The external enemy is an internal exile. And until you recognize what's actually happening, you'll keep fighting the same battle with different faces forever. This isn't about letting people off the hook for genuinely harmful behavior. Some people really are toxic, and distance from them is appropriate. Jung wasn't naive about human capacity for destruction. But he also observed that the strongest emotional charges usually indicate projection rather than pure perception. When someone merely annoys you, you're probably just seeing them clearly. When someone activates rage or disgust or contempt that feels almost physical in its intensity, something else is happening. Your unconscious is using them as a screen onto which it projects material it can't face directly. The heat of the reaction is proportional to how deeply you've buried whatever they're reflecting back. The strategy is simple to describe and difficult to execute. Every time someone triggers you, instead of focusing on what's wrong with them, ask what part of yourself you're seeing in them that you've rejected. This question will feel absurd at first because your mind is convinced the problem is entirely external. That conviction is the defense mechanism doing its job. It protects you from the discomfort of self-confrontation by insisting the enemy is out there rather than in here. But if you can stay with the question long enough, something shifts. You start to see patterns. The same qualities keep triggering you across different people and situations. That repetition is the unconscious desperately trying to get your attention, pointing again and again at exactly what needs to be integrated. Jung called this integration shadow work. The shadow contains everything about yourself that you've deemed unacceptable. Not just negative traits, but also positive capacities that threatened the identity you constructed to survive. Maybe you buried your ambition because your family punished anyone who stood out. Maybe you suppressed your anger because you learned early that expressing it meant losing love. Maybe you disowned your sensitivity because the environment you grew up in required toughness. These qualities didn't disappear when you rejected them. They went underground, into the shadow, where they accumulated charge. Now they emerge as intense reactions to people who openly display what you secretly contain but refuse to acknowledge. The paradox is that the people who bother you most are offering you the clearest path to wholeness. They're not obstacles to your peace, but invitations to expand your self-understanding. Every projection you reclaim is a piece of yourself you get back. When you integrate your own arrogance, arrogant people lose their power to destabilize you because you've already faced that quality internally. When you accept your own neediness as part of being human, needy people stop triggering contempt because you've extended compassion to that part of yourself first. Jung saw that judgment of others is almost always unprocessed self-judgment in disguise. Heal the inner relationship, and the outer relationships transform without you having to change anyone but yourself. This isn't abstract philosophy. It's a practical technology for emotional freedom. Right now, there are people in your life who control your emotional state without even trying. They say one thing or behave one way, and you lose your center. That's not power they have. That's power you've given them by refusing to face what they represent in your own psyche. The moment you reclaim the projection, the power returns to you. They become just another person with their own struggles and limitations, rather than a figure capable of ruining your day. Jung worked with patients who transformed relationships that had tortured them for decades simply by doing this inner work. The other person never changed at all. What changed was the projector. Most people will never do this work because it requires admitting that they're not as different from the people they despise as they'd like to believe. The ego has a massive investment in maintaining separation between self and shadow. It built its entire identity on the premise that certain qualities are me and certain qualities are definitely not me. Shadow work demolishes this premise. It forces you to own capacities you spent years disowning. That's humiliating if your self-worth depends on being a certain type of person. But it's liberating if you're willing to become someone larger than any fixed identity could contain. Jung saw that the person who integrates their shadow doesn't become worse. They become more whole, more human, more capable of genuine compassion because they've stopped pretending they're above the flaws they've been projecting onto everyone else. The simple strategy is this. When someone triggers you, pause before reacting and ask yourself what you're refusing to see in the mirror they're holding up. Do this consistently, and two things happen. First, you stop being controlled by people and situations that used to hijack your emotions. Second, you gradually become someone who has no shadow material left to project, which means you start seeing people as they actually are, rather than as screens for your own unresolved psychology. Jung believed this was the path to genuine maturity. Not perfection, but integration. Not being above human darkness, but being honest about your own participation in it. That honesty is the strategy. Everything else is just details.